This meeting of the Economy and Neighbourhoods Scrutiny Panel. This is an additional meeting that we organised to respond to two different papers. Firstly, the Hackett Review, which came out as a response to the Grenfell Tower strategy. That came out earlier this year. And more recently, the Green Paper issued by the government, A New Deal for Social Housing, which is a consultation for local authorities and others to respond to the government, partly about some of the recommendations that came out of the Hackett Review, but it is actually a much more far-reaching review of social housing. As a result of this being a late addition to our programme, it has affected the ability of members to attend. So we are quorate today. We've got two members of the panel here who are going to take part in the meeting, and we've also got a third member who is actually going to be here as an observer because of issues around conflict of interest. So just to give apologies to start off with, so we've had apologies from Councillor Bolt, Councillor Murgatroyd, Councillor Upal, and our two co-optees, Mark Mercer and Andrew Bird. For Councillor Hughes, as Chair of the Fire Authority, she has felt rightly, I think, after advice, that there is a potential conflict of interest, that she is present to observe the meeting. So, can I welcome the officers and an officer from KNH who's attending the meeting today, so that people who may be watching this externally know who's taking part in the meeting. I think we'll start off by doing introductions. So we'll do the two panel members first, and then if we could introduce our officers who are going to be taking part in the discussion. So just to start off with, I'm the lead member who's chairing this panel, Councillor Rob Walker.
I'm Councillor Bill Armicket.
I'm Matt Buckley, Director of Growth and Housing.
Councillor Cathy Scott. Colin Housing Services. Private Officer Director of Property for KNH.
Right, thanks very much. Okay.
In terms of item 2, declarations of interest, any to declare? Thank you. Admissions of the public. This is a meeting in public, so it is open for members of the public to attend and also for people to watch externally. If there was anything which was commercially sensitive or details concerning individuals, we would take that item in private, but I don't think that's going to happen with today's session. So we're going to move straight into the key item for today, which is item 4. I should have actually said earlier, sorry for missing this, item 1, the previous meetings, because we've only got one member of the panel taking part today who wasn't present at the previous meeting. We're going to take the minutes at the meeting, the regular meeting that we're going to have next week, so that we've got more people who are present at the meeting who can comment on their content, approve them, and raise any matters that may arise. So we'll move straight on to item 4. And I think Councillor Scott's going to start us off with this.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad you invited us here today. We're here to discuss the Social Housing Green Paper. So the purpose of the report today, if you turn to page 9, is with the Scrutiny Panel and the Council's response to discuss it. Social Housing Green Paper and the implications of the Hackett Review. So, the Hackett Review. Dame Hackett's final report was published in May 2017, and it found the system based on ignorance, indifference, a culture that was adopted, a race to the bottom, the lack of clarity around roles and responsibilities and those accountable for fire safety. There was inadequate regulatory oversight of enforcement. Far-reaching recommendations, but important, the notes points in this is, if you look in your report, if you look at 2.2 of the report, and in particular 2.2F, which states the Council, as a duty holder, cannot pass accountability to KNH as the Building Safety Manager. So the Social Green Paper, published in August 2018, reads as a response to Grenfell / Hackett as 5 key planks. ensuring homes are safe and decent, effective resolution and complaints, empowering residents and strengthening the regulatory, tackling stigma, celebrating thriving communities, and expanding supply and supporting home ownership. It also stresses the importance of building a culture of accountability and strengthening the voice of the tenants, which is the most important thing here as well. The Council's response to the Green Paper, officers can take you through the details here today to discuss, and I've got Naz Parker here and also Helen Geldart and Heidi Thompson from K&H. They can talk about shaping the final response, which is really important that Scrutiny are involved in it. K&H has already undertaken a significant amount of work since Grenfell to ensure that the safety of the tenants. And can I just say they were very, very proactive and actually put it out there through the media. They had discussed it with tenants and then reassured them, so that reassurance is constant, and there's that communication, it's open on both ways. And broadly speaking, the Council welcomes much of what the report is in the report, in particular reviewing the decent home standard and how the building safety could be built into it, and giving tenants a greater redress in having their concerns heard and acted upon, and reform of the HRA. And from that moment now, I'm going to pass you on to Naz Parker and Helen Geldart, and they'll carry on talking you through it.
So, Chair, do you want us to take you through the report or take it as read?
If you want to pick out what you see as the key items and any implications from it.
Okay, I'm just going to pass over to Helen to do that then, if that's okay. I think Kathy's covered quite a lot of it, though, in terms of what the key points are.
People who may be looking at this externally, who perhaps haven't, well, they haven't got the benefit of the paperwork that we've been able to read. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the report that you've got outlines in quite some detail the work that we've done trying to link the Social Housing Green Paper to the Hackett report. But I know you're looking at the broader Social Housing Green Paper today. So I think, as Naz just said, Councillor Scott has gone through some of the key issues around the linking between the two reports. There's quite a lot in the report that we've published today, which is around strengthening, in particular, some of the proposals and recommendations that are coming out from the various reviews and consultation documents around ensuring that our homes are safe for people to live in, and looking at reviewing the safety standards and the decency standards for tenants living in housing accommodation. The Green Paper itself has around 48 questions, I think, that it's specifically asking organisations, etc., to look at and to respond to. The questions are set out linked to the individual chapters within the Social Housing Green Paper. So initially, the first chapters are looking around ensuring that homes are decent and safe, and looking at reviewing those standards. And I think, as I said before, why most people would welcome that clarity around building regulation and ensuring that properties are safe, not only in terms of their construction and their maintenance, but also in terms of how those properties are managed as well. So we'd welcome any comments and views in terms of those elements. There is a large section in there around ensuring that the regulation of those standards, once they are agreed, are actually robust, that should give, hopefully, some assurance to tenants living in properties that their homes are safe and are being managed well. And there's quite a lot in there around whether or not there should be more robust regulatory framework, and that should be a consistent approach across the whole social housing sector. So it's looking at, should increased regulation be for all of the sector, but in particular, I think, for local authorities. At the moment, the social housing regulator has some powers, but not quite as extensive as powers in the housing association sector. And it's looking at ensuring that that there is an intervention process that can hold people to account for ensuring that safety issues are addressed. The third and fourth chapters, I think, talk about ensuring that the tenant's voice is particularly well heard, and that tenants have got a robust method of being able to express their concerns and inquiries, and able to ensure that any complaints that they do have are dealt with in a timely fashion, and that there are appropriate redress arrangements in place for those tenants and residents who may be raising concerns. One of the other areas in the paper talks about tackling the stigma of social housing, and there is quite a number of questions around what might we do as local authorities and housing association providers and across the sector really in terms of improving the image or the positive messages that are communicated around the fact that social housing tenants and the communities in which they live actually make a significant contribution to society, and we should try to celebrate those that success and they're asking for examples and ideas of how we might improve the view of social housing across the board. What else? And then the final section is around making sure that we can build new homes and making sure that those new homes are built to appropriate standards, and that some of the issues and concerns that have been picked up by the Hackett report are taken into account, and they're asking questions around how might we do that, and how might the planning process and other mechanisms that we have ensure that new build properties that we badly need across all of the tenure types are built to a safe standard for people.
Chair, if I could just add a couple of bits to that. The Social Housing Green Paper, I think in terms of the chapters that have been outlined today, the three that probably relate most to today's conversation are around ensuring homes are safe and decent, because there are a comprehensive set of recommendations in the Hackett review around that, and it talks to the Council's ambition to develop a Kirklees housing standard within which building safety obviously will be integral. One of the things that Hackett found in particular, and the Social Housing Green Paper is now consulting us on, in terms of government's response to Hackett, is the effective resolution of complaints. And Councillor Scott has already highlighted the fact that the voice of the tenant and the voice of the resident is absolutely critical in ensuring how landlords respond in the future. Having that proper redress, so it's not just having a complaints process or having a tenant involvement strategy, it's what comes back from that is genuinely heard and acted on. And so in so doing, government have sought to empower residents by strengthening the role of the social housing regulator, which in itself is a new body. It used to be a part of what was the Homes and Communities Agency, is now Homes England, but it's now been established as an independent social housing regulator as apart from of the arm. It will behave in this space. It will probably behave much like the Audit Commission did many moons ago when it used to issue star ratings. It currently has a remit to govern the work of housing associations principally, and it tends to focus on, in terms of its remit, primarily on the governance of housing associations and the viability of housing associations. I think our intelligence and TENI and our links back into MHCLG are suggesting that they will reintroduce what was known as the consumer standard, which is what this agenda talks to. So the role of the social housing regulator and its remit over councils as landlords is also up for debate and discussion. And I guess in terms of our response back to government, one of the things we're saying is councils already regulate the housing sector because of its statutory obligations to ensure tenants are safe. However, we are willing to explore what role a national government regulator might play under this space. But you take those things and link them back to Hackett, and as Councillor Scott has pointed out, 2.2 in the report is the critical area, because Hackett has 10 sections to it, all of which are very important in terms of response to Grenfell and to avoid the tragedy that was Grenfell in any other place around the country, least of all here in Kirklees. But from an officer perspective, certainly, the most important part of those 10 sections has to be what they call the occupation and maintenance phase of a building's life, which is where 23,000 homes currently sit. They sit in that occupation and maintenance phase. And so we need to really think through how we manage property when it reaches that. Obviously, we need to think about what our planning and building control systems look like and what our procurement mechanisms look like to ensure how we ensure that building safety is built into every part of a building's life. But given that the here and now is we have 23,000 homes in the management of K&H, that's the bit I think the Scrutiny Committee should certainly have a look at today. Okay.
I certainly can. Thank you. As the report clearly states, K&H work closely with the council and we are wholly owned, and we have a big part to play in ensuring that our residents are kept safe and our tenants' homes. What we're actually doing within K&H at this moment in time is ensuring that we strengthen the procedures that we currently have in place. There are a number of already programmes that we do have available to people to have a voice as part of our consultation, so tenant involvement strategy and the community voices, tenant and resident associations as such. But what we're doing is working very closely with the council on enforcing that and making that a lot more around that compliance and safety in properties. What we've been working on is really around how we can improve the way that we manage our stock, but it's also people's homes. So it's making sure that we look at that compliance part, and we've already been doing an awful lot of work in that, which is within the report. But just really around that, we've already started to look at things such as that are in the media at the moment around fire doors. We're well on with that programme. We're using accredited door systems, so we've been listening to government and taking guidance from building control. Working very closely with that, and also with West Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service. So there's a lot going on. I will also be part of the JCA, which will be under Joanne Bartholomew of the council, and that's been set up for next month. So that's a real major step that we're doing now. So it's, I think with regard to K&H itself, we also have a fire safety management plan which is currently in draft that will work with the council with their fire safety policy that's currently in place. So it's very much aligned and ensuring that we do have that. But I think just mirroring what Councillor Scott said, it's about the tenant voice now and how we can do that. It's not always easy to get people engaged on groups and so on, so it's how we use digital platforms, media, that sort of thing to really encourage that debate so people do have a real say in what we're doing within their properties. So I think it's very proactive, very joined up thinking, and certainly something that's high on our agenda at the moment. Thank you.
Chip in if you wave your hand, because I'll be looking mostly in this direction. Right, I think my opening comment really is that it's very positive from both the council and the K&H point of view that there was such a positive and quick proactive response to the Grenfell Tower strategy and the Hackett report when it came out. I think the fact as well that the work that was undertaken at that phase, the fact that it was put out in the public domain is important, but it may be worth reporting that again today, just to clarify the extent of any issues that cropped up within Kirklees. So could you perhaps summarise the extent to which we had multiple occupation buildings, flats of over 10 stories, or other buildings where there were any issues? How did we compare to other local authorities?
Post-Grenfell, as you've rightly pointed out, Chair, the council moved very, very quickly to assure ourselves that our residents were safe. We have 4 tower blocks that fall into the category of being above 10-storey. Each of those has had those fire risk assessments through our colleagues in K&H, and to assure ourselves that there wasn't any of the ACM material. None of our buildings have that. We had a concern about Harold Wilson Court for a while, but we've now assured ourselves that we don't need to get that material tested. and actually the ministry, when we discussed with them, said we didn't have to have it tested. So we're comfortable with the 4 tower blocks that are in our own ownership and being managed by our colleagues in K&H. We also wanted to assure ourselves that other public buildings in the ownership of other public sector bodies were also safe and that the fire risk was being managed. Other than one building in the private sector that is above 10-storey, we've been assured by our colleagues in health and other places that they've got all of that under control. We're still in negotiation with our private sector partner to talk to them about what needs to be done. There may come a point where we may need to use our enforcement powers if that private sector owner does not comply with what we need them to do. Beyond that, we've then gone on a review of understanding when our fire risk assessments were carried out, which ones were in date, which ones are out of date. We've put all of that, rectified all of that. We have a full view now of the things that we need to do. We've drilled into things like doors, compartmentalisation through normal building maintenance. Has that been compromised where it was already in place? We've now gone and done all the fire risk assessments that we needed to do, particularly around the high risk elements of fire safety. As Heidi has pointed out, we've developed a new fire safety policy to take into account not only what was coming out of the Grenfell inquiry, but also what was coming out of Hackett. We will revisit that again once government's full response to the Hackett recommendations is published. As Heidi has said, we've revised the K&H fire safety management plan to reflect some of the risks that might be prevalent, and so that we've got those in view, that we're carrying out the actions that we need to carry out. It's something that we pick up in the performance monitoring with K&H at every opportunity. Compliance is at the very top of our agenda now in terms of performance reporting. And we haven't stopped just at fire. So we've at the same time tried to assure ourselves around other issues that might compromise the health and safety of our tenants. Maybe Heidi wishes to add something there in terms of the breadth and depth of what we have done to date.
Yes, I'd be really interested. Probably a couple of months ago now, I actually went out with Heidi and K&H colleagues to have a look at some of the refurbishment work that you were doing on smaller blocks of flats. So I would be interested to know how this process has informed the work that you're doing.
Thank you, yes. As you said, when we went out on that trip, that was around one of our 6-storey blocks, but it's exactly the same with regard to fire and compartmentalisation. And because we're doing a lot of investment work that has been agreed with the council, we have been able to identify some issues around some of the fire stopping through floors. What that means is purely we've found some the old design that would have been the original plan has created chimneys internally within the flats, so we've removed those and actually remodelled the kitchens and made them much more modern, much more friendly, and also, you know, improved generally around the flats. So that's part of the learning, but also new fire doors and things that, you know, making sure that where we've got inner rooms, that we've actually got fire doors now in those flats that they wouldn't have before because it wasn't part of building regulations. So stuff like that we've been able to do. But other things we've done to provide assurance and ensure that we know more about the properties that we've got is we've done some category 4 fire safety fire risk assessments, which basically means they're quite intrusive but allow us to see that there is compartmentalisation. So that's an investment we've put into that just to give that reassurance really, so that we can understand what's happening with certainly the high rise, which is seen as the higher risk, but also within sheltered properties, which has got our more vulnerable tenants in, and things around that. So there's been a lot of work going on. The other thing is that we also have the property services part within the council, which is our manual worker, and they deliver a lot of our work. So we've been doing a lot of training, getting them accredited so that they can install fire doors, ensuring that we have that as well. So there's been a lot of work in the background. Certainly haven't been sitting doing nothing.
And Chair, whilst cost is always an issue, and so we get value for money for the public purse, we have increased the budgets to K&H to address some of those issues that we've just mapped out, and also in forward plans in the 5-year capital plan, we're making provision to ensure that there's a buffer for any compliance issues that might arise as a result of in-year surveys. And we've also made provision for our sprinkler system, but if I'm being honest, I think the jury is still out as to whether sprinkler systems are the right solution or whether whether they are the solution, and we've not had a clear steer from all our partners and also from government in terms of whether sprinkler systems in high-rise blocks will keep residents safer or whether it will compromise their safety. So once the provisions there in budgetary terms, should we choose that is the route to take, and that's something I think that when we have a bit more information, we'll advise Cabinet and make those decisions.
Right, thank you. Yeah, that sort of preempted a question I was going to ask about the resource implications of this, because reading through the report, there are all sorts of other recommendations like 5-yearly checks of electrical systems within all dwellings and certification of that. And all these things must lead to more resources being needed to carry these things out. So is there an issue within the budgets that we have available, or will we cope with what we've got?
So can Councillor Scott answer this? I think there's a view around sprinkler systems.
Yeah, on the sprinkler systems, yes, definitely. It's built into our budget already, and we are looking at it as an administration. We did say we were looking at it. The other point I was going to mention was that we've got a fire safety officer that has been seconded to the council for 2 years, and this shows good partnership working with the fire and rescue services as well as the council. So there is a partnership working there. So that officer's been seconded for 2 years. And I wanted to highlight that today because a lot of people don't realise there is this partnership working going on in the background.
Yeah, I think partnerships are going to be integral really to this work and absolutely key, yeah. So I think it's good to see those things are happening. Do you want to just finish off, Naz, and I'll throw the questions open to first Councillor Armour and then Councillor Stewart.
I was just going to take your question on budgetary provision and impact on resources. So there is an impact on resources because the recommendations of the Hackett review, as you'll know, are far-reaching, and there's a need to have a degree of competence within our fire safety teams. There's the requirement to invest in training, and in terms of becoming the duty holder and having K&H as our building safety manager, we'll have to invest in staff to make sure that we're properly resourced. The budgetary implications are not severe, so we can afford to do that. I'm not sure we have much of a choice, to be honest with you. We would prioritise that for revenue resource in that sense. And if we needed to make efficiencies elsewhere, we would seek to do that to ensure that we're properly funding that compliance agenda. One of the challenges, though, is that every single landlord is looking for these people. So in terms of recruitment and retention, that is becoming quite challenging because there are only so many. So we're looking at novel and creative ways of recruiting people who have either graduated in, say, some sort of building degree or looking at apprenticeships so that we can grow our own and invest in them and train them in the way that we need to manage our stock. That's not to say we won't recruit experienced people, but that is the challenging piece. And every landlord has a differential pay and reward strategy, and it depends on how we compare with the market as to whether we are an attractive proposition as an employer.
No doubt interesting implications for the fire authority and the fire service. Right, Councillor Armour.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Slightly tangential, but not as wide of the mark as I normally am. It's a bit of a question. I think it will fall under Mr. Parker's remit nowadays. But obviously, we're a university town. We're seeing a lot of building for student accommodations. Some of that's multi-storey, much of it's multi-storey. Can you assure me that we're making the absolutely best use of planning regulations and building regulations that we can to ensure safety in these buildings, over and beyond the minimum standard, if that's possible? Thank you.
I can assure you that we do as much as the legislation and the policy environment enables councils to do within their planning function. There is I think, a risk in the system which we've highlighted back to government, where as the local authority building control responsibility falls to us as an authority, both as a council and as a planning authority. And the privatisation, Chair, if I could call it that, Chair, in terms of who can be a building control inspector. So you have a lot of private contractors who are building control inspectors, as well as the local authority discharging that function. But a number of developers and house builders will use a private inspector. The degree of assurance we get from that, I think, is limited, particularly when if you're my client as a house builder and I'm looking for repeat business from you as an inspector, I'm not going to make your life as difficult as I might do as a building controller. And so we have put representations back into government, and I think Dame Hackett has also identified that as an issue, and is talking about creating a local authority building standards service that will be part of a joint competent authority, and that will give us, going forward, far more leverage, I would say, to ensure and assure that those safety issues are being built into the planning and building regulations system. Yeah.
So is that one of the recommendations that, one of the responses that you've made to the Green Paper? Because certainly as a ward councillor, it is something that I've picked up as issues with people who are moving into new properties, and they're not happy with this standard of building regulation that's taken place, where there have been private firms carrying out this duty rather than it being the local authority.
Yes, is the short answer. But we've not just waited to respond via this mechanism. I've been to many roundtable discussions with the Ministry, particularly around building safety and housing supply, and I've made that point repeatedly. So have other landlords who have been around the table who have been consulted. It's one that has been picked up, and I can see it flowing through the Green Paper, and I can see it flowing through the Hackett Review as well.
Councillor Stewart, then.
Just a couple of comments, because I realise that the Hackett report isn't just about social housing, it's about construction industry as a whole, it's about the private sector as much as it is anybody else. So I'm really chuffed to hear how proactive the Kirklees Council and the partners have been in addressing some of the concerns raised from the report, and using the tragedy to learn from it, and you didn't wait for the report to come to tell you what to do. So I'm really pleased about that. I'm also pleased that you're willing to take on that extra responsibilities for overseeing some of the private sector developments. So that'd be nice if that does come to fruition. There is a grey area around the sprinklers, and I do think it would be great to have some further clarity on that. So it'd be good if that came back to us, because I'm personally a big fan, but and I don't know where the grey areas are, so it'd be good to learn from that, learn more about that. My only area of concern is this complaints process and the tenant's voice, and I would like to have greater understanding about what we're doing to capture that tenant's voice and act on their complaints.
I think the essence of what you said is absolutely right. Tenant's voice is absolutely paramount in everything we do. Before Heidi comes in and can discuss what they're saying, it's not just about a digital platform. I think there has been part of a problem where the tenant's voice could get lost because not everybody's on the digital platform. I want to see the TRAs, as much of them as possible, continuing their own way and regenerate and get more people. But we're now looking at housing, not just the housing, the whole environment. So perhaps the states will be more involved and want to be part of it. So yes, the digital voice, it's great and where you can feed into, but I'm absolutely passionate that we don't lose, the people that are there that first started it, so they can be part of it, because not everybody is on digital.
she'll tell you what they are doing.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I absolutely agree. Digital's one part, but there's so many, aren't there? So many different ways we've got to try and engage. What we're already doing, certainly with this new neighbourhood approach that we're currently looking at with the Wayne Court development we're doing, we actually held an open day, got people out, had discussions with them and was understanding their views on what they wanted from their communities and everything else. Certainly the other things we're looking at with regard to that area, with regard to Berry Brow. But we recognise that face-to-face is much better if we can do that, and we're making a real conscious effort to get out as teams to be part of that. This is what this new tenant engagement strategy is going to be about, certainly in response to not just the Green Paper but the Hackett Review and all of that. But from my point of view as Director of Property, it's about how I can use that voice to actually make some of the decisions about what we actually do with people's homes and making sure that they understand exactly what we are doing. So things such as we've been talking around ensuring that people know what to do in the event of a fire, and obviously working with the fire service on that sort of thing as well, but also about what the designs might mean. So a sprinkler system would be part of that as well. So there's a lot of discussion, but I think for us it's certainly about increasing the presence, making sure that we've got these various platforms to be able to communicate effectively and get their thoughts back as well.
So that Heidi's quite mapped out well what we have been doing in terms of our tenant involvement strategy. As you heard me say earlier, it isn't just about an involvement strategy, so I've stood up in front of you and listened to you. The key question is, what are you going to do with that? And so being heard and having proper redress in terms of the complaints process is something that I think now that it's looking like government are going to adopt these things. So your point about becoming proactive is that we have to review the complaints process. We have to look at the openness and transparency agenda and what we are willing and should publish to tenants in terms of building safety in their home, be it a tower block or be it a house or be it a bungalow. And think through better, I think, in terms of, because government will expect us in establishing the Joint Competence Authority, they will expect us to do a safety case every 5 years. Yeah. And that safety case will have to ensure that the voice of the tenant is in there, that they're assured by the information that we publish to say these are the things we are doing to keep your home safe. When we come in and do a repair or do a refurbishment, we continue to keep it safe in this way, so that they have that information. We link them, should the social housing regulator get a remit across council housing as a landlord, but we mustn't just be worried about our own housing, we should be worried about our partners' housing as much as we would be our own, so to ensure that the social housing regulator has proper oversight over these issues within the sector as a whole. Linking back the residents' voice into that, so that should we fail through the complaints process to resolve a tenant's complaint, that they have redress not just through the ombudsman, but also the regulator. And the regulator then has powers to grade us. And if we fail on building safety or fail to resolve, the regulator will want to know about that, the regulator will be concerned about that, and it will be reflected in our landlord rating in terms of governance particularly and consumer standard. So if we were downgraded on governance, that is not a good place to be. We would always want to achieve what they call G1, which is the highest rating you can get. G3 is not just on the naughty step, you have really you are failing in your governance responsibility. So governance becomes critical in how we manage our stock in the future, particularly around the clarity of roles and responsibilities between the council and K&H. And as long as we have that clarity and that we are assuring, the council is assuring itself as the principal duty holder that K&H, its building safety manager, is discharging its council's obligations, then we should be assured. But the voice of the resident is something that I know Councillor Scott and I know Cabinet are incredibly committed to ensuring has a loud voice and is heard that we do things with it. So we will need to review our complaints process, I would say, so that we ensure that we build those things into it now.
Yeah, I think greater involvement for residents in all of this is absolutely critical, and it was obviously one of the massive failings in the Grenfell Tower tragedy that people were not being listened to, and the local authority housing providers were not acting on problems that were being raised. In terms of the working group that we're setting up to look at these issues, because this is really just the beginning of the process, isn't it? There's a lot of work to do. We've got officers from the council, we've got officers from K&H taking part. Is there scope for potentially involving some residents at that stage as these things are kind of being planned so that they can actually help set up systems that might involve people more effectively?
I'll speak from a council perspective. Sorry, I'll speak from a council perspective, Chair, but I also wouldn't mind Heidi making a contribution in that. Absolutely, yes. We've just established that. We're trying to scope out its remit in full. As I've said, 2.2 in the report, that should form quite a large basis for its remit and scope. K&H are, as part of the new tenant involvement strategy, busy recruiting to a new tenant panel that we see being part of the new governance arrangements. We see tenants being representative on any new governance arrangements we put on. So you have a tenant panel almost acting as a tenant scrutiny panel, and then you have ensure that on the governance main governance arrangements there is adequate tenant representation. So once that tenant panel is up and running, we would want to ensure that that joint working group involves that tenant panel in the scrutiny and shaping of the new system. We should also think about partners in that, so particularly fire service and how they will inform that process in terms of that joint working group, and whether they should actually be a member of that joint working group rather than just an advisor to that working group.
Just to add to that as well, which obviously we do have tenant representation on the board of K&H, but also we work very closely with TPAS, the Tenant Participation Advisory Service, who have been absolutely excellent in coming forward with a lot of ideas. They're currently working through the Green Paper on a national level as well. So I think for us, certainly with response to the Hackett review, I will be looking for a tenant representation on a form of property group that will be within my remit. So absolutely, yes, see that as part and parcel of what we'll be doing moving forward.
To what extent is the same level of partnership and participation taking place with other housing providers, and to what extent can we influence that? So other housing associations and so on.
Sorry, Chair, I'm not sure I fully understand the question. Would you mind asking it again?
Trying to explain that again. So with K&H, you're building into your methods of operation ways in which you are consulting with tenants. We've obviously got other social housing providers within Kirklees. To what extent can we influence their procedures and for involving the residents in the governance of things within their housing stock?
So we now have a housing partnership that's forming itself, so that we can engage with housing association partners more fully, and not necessarily just around building safety, but there are regulatory. There's a regulatory construct that looks after housing associations in that way. I sit on a housing association board, so I know that compliance is at the very top of the housing association sector's agenda. The council has an influencing role. It has a role within planning. It has a role within building control, and it has enforcement powers where they are necessary and appropriate. In terms of shaping the housing association sector's response to Grenfell, Hackett, and the Social Housing Green Paper, we have very little locus as an authority, but we have a very strong regulator in that sector. And I've seen at least 2 housing associations being downgraded for failure on fire safety. So So I don't think we need to do any more than that, other than continue to work in partnership, have shared objectives and shared values around this agenda. We do trust them, but, you know, the best systems in the world can fail. So, you know, we will want to continue to assure ourselves that they're doing that. So what we'll probably do going forward, which we probably don't do enough of right now, is to ensure that when the regulatory judgments from the regulator come out on a housing association, that we look at where their governance issues are, and if they're being downgraded, for what reason they're being downgraded, and if it's fire safety, then obviously we'd take a risk-based approach to that sector in that sense.
Sorry. It says here that one of the objectives is reducing stigma associated with social housing, and I'm just thinking to myself that I think the decline in the caretaking service has had a really negative impact on our estates. The appearance of our estates sort of exaggerates that stigma, and I wonder if more could be done to enhance the environment.
I'll start. The chapter on stigma and perceptions of social housing is quite an interesting one, because it's not wrong in its analysis, but in terms of what landlords can actually do about challenging the perceptions of social housing and social housing tenants and the areas within which those houses are located, I think the media has much more of a role in creating that perception than the caretaking service. That does not mean that we want to diminish the importance of the look and feel of our neighbourhoods. And, you know, Councillor Scott has been at pains, and Heidi's got some of the scars, in the sense that when we were looking at the new asset management strategy, neighbourhood first, place first, people first, and then the quality of the housing, you know, in terms of what you invest in. You know, you can have the best looking house, but if you walk out into your neighbourhood and it feels unsafe, it feels that there's like loads of antisocial behaviour in the life. So which is where the caretaking service comes in. Whether it's a caretaking service or whether we have our street cleansing teams and our place teams doing more around that in conjunction with our partner in K&H is something that we're currently looking at in terms of saying how do we make our neighbourhoods look better, feel safer, and if that then challenges what I would call the tabloid press, creating this perception of, anyway, you know what it is, I don't want to really recite the tabloid press's view of the world, if that's okay.
Okay, I can certainly add to what with the approach we're taking, certainly with our new investment programme, which is around the new asset management strategy. And by looking at that place, we're working collectively across the council, so that will be with waste management, with parks, with open space, all of that, to try and enhance communities, but also ensuring that people are part of that solution, because we can't do that to people. That has to be part of the communities that they live and work in. But the other part is with regard to the tragedy at Grenfell, we do still carry out daily safety checks on all of the high-risk properties, so that's all of the high-rise. And by that, what we're doing is clearing anything that's an obstruction or where there's been some fly tipping, that sort of thing. We are constantly doing that daily. And we've noticed a real enhancement for some of the areas. Certainly when we went to have a look at Berry Brow, went with Councillor Scott, it's looking pretty clean and tidy. Yes, there are some issues, but we're trying to deal with that on a daily basis. Appreciate that's not the whole of every single area, but as part of our neighbourhood approach, and certainly looking at how we can work more effectively together, and certainly perhaps enhancing what we need to do across the piece, not just with the caretakers. I'm hopeful that we can start to see a change over the coming months, and hopefully time will see that improve. But I think with regard to stigma, that's something that we can certainly work on, trying to be more positive, getting role models within communities, getting that more in the press. But as Naz has said, that's really around that press and how people perceive that in local media and so on. Thank you.
The last thing I wanted to ask a question about is, within the report, there's quite a bit of stress on it being clear about who holds what role and what their authority and responsibility is. Do you feel that changes will have to be made in terms of the way we operate as a result of some of these recommendations within both the Hackett report and things that are in the Green Paper?
It's absolutely clear, Chair, that change is on its way. It's unavoidable in a positive way for tenants, I believe, and I think the administration here believes. So we do really need to, as part of our governance arrangements of how we run our housing operations and our maintenance operations, have to look at that clarity, have to look at who, because Hackett is clear, whoever is the owner of the properties is the landlord. The council owns the properties, and therefore we are accountable for resident and tenant safety. Not K&H, and that's not trying to be disparaging of K&H's role. They perform a great function and they do it really well, and have been really proactive in responding to everything we've asked them for in terms of fire safety in the council. But God forbid anything like that should happen here. But I know who will be in front of the TV cameras. It will not be the chair of K&H, it will not be the chief executive of K&H, it will be the leader of the council, and it will be the chief executive of the council, and I think rightly so again. So we do absolutely need to look at what the governance arrangements within our housing operations need to look like. So change at that level, change at the level of operational activity in terms of saying, very clearly what the council expects of its building safety manager in K&H, how it wants to get its assurance in terms of reporting. And there'll be also, I think, in that mix, some change where we have to think about how we do sample auditing to enable ourselves to understand that the reporting in itself is assured. There are a number of different things around. I've mentioned some of them about transparency. So how do we then report back to tenants and enable them to hold us to account? The complaints process will need to change. Some of our systems will need to then reflect some of those changes in the policy environment. We'll have to look at how our asset management strategy evolves over the future. So in year one, I think we've got a robust approach to enable us to be assured that we are responding to the safety agenda. So there are a huge number of changes that we're going to have to look at. So some landlords might be thinking, well, let's see what government actually adopt out of the recommendations. What we believe as a council, and I think Councillor Scott would reiterate this, is that actually some of the things that are coming out of Hackett are things we should have been doing anyway. And so it's good practice to put those in place now, regardless of where government head with that. Yeah, so it's not just about compliance for us, it's going beyond compliance and investing in quality and investing in safety.
Right, have we got any further questions? Yes, of course, Judith.
It's not to do with Hackett. On page 99 of the report, at the bottom, it talks about the funding of private registered providers, and it talks about that they have to have access to PFI to provide this housing, and we know in the budget that's now been scrapped. Have we any idea how they're now going to be funded to build this housing? Because this is part of their strategy for new building.
Yep, I can answer that question, Chair. It's not private finance initiative. So private registered providers is the government's terminology for housing associations, would you believe? And the way the housing association business model works in terms of building new homes is to get an amount of money from the Affordable Homes Programme that the government runs, the 9 billion referred to. So again, an element of grant to subsidise the rent below market rents, and then the rest they raise as debt from bank financing, essentially. So their lenders then provide the rest. And generally speaking, the ratio works out to about 35% grant, 65% lending. But it has moved over the years, depending on how generous or not generous governments wish to be. So more recently, we've seen an upward curve in the grant per unit that a housing association and ourselves as a landlord can access. I can remember a time back in 2010 when it had been slashed and halved. So it just depends on which government and what its view is in terms of the policy context as to how much they want to invest in subsidising affordable rents.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. More of a comment, but we might get some response. Just to declare a knowledge rather than interest, spent a large part of my youth as a son of a council tenant. I was brought up in Bradley. Now live in Deaton. And I was a council tenant in Berry Brow in my own right, so I've got some knowledge of which I speak. Stigma associated with what we used to call council estates, now areas of social housing, it's a very real thing, but there's a relatively, or perhaps deceptively as well, simple response, which is don't build areas of social housing. They've got a bit of a prototype in what used to be Brackennall. I've forgotten what they're trying to call it now, but Lower Pixby didn't take on. Where there's mixed tenure. There's some housing associations, some private occupied, some private rented. And I think that is the only way, and it is a long term, it's the only way of overcoming the stigma of having areas seen as being purely social housing. Problem is, it was put by a former professor of mine, that if services are reserved for the poor, they very quickly become poor services.
I can only agree with the statement. I think mixed tenure is part of our forward plans. The things we are saying to the market, particularly on the land that is in council ownership that we want to have housing built on, we're asking for mixed tenure developments for the very reasons you've just pointed out, because it gives you mixed income communities that are more sustainable in the future. There's that mutuality of support that emerges from that. There's an element of pride, which then destigmatizes or prevents stigma from appearing. Yeah.
I just feel desperate need to say that not all social housing is for poor people. That a lot of people do that, they choose social housing, it's a preferential choice. There's a lot of very intelligent, very highly educated, successful people that live in social housing. And it is sad that the tabloids have painted it a really bad picture of it. So, sorry, I just had to comment.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you. Just a very, very quick comment there. With the allocation policies we have, and I'm not complaining about those policies, but with the points-based system, families with lower household incomes do tend to be prioritised for social housing nowadays.
I think this is something we've obviously. Can you just say something first, Kath? You're obviously working with Councillor Hughes on this issue with various officers. It is something we are, at some point we are planning to bring back. Yeah, sorry, Kath.
Yeah, I'd just like to respond to Councillor Allen. We don't take income into account. We don't take income into account at all on any application. It's based on that person's needs. So, you know, if it's medical needs all the way through, so it depends on what crisis or if they're homeless and things like that. So I can absolutely categorically state that the banding is based on need.
Thank you. Right. So just to tie things up, very interesting discussion. Thanks again for coming along today. I think your contributions have been really useful. I think it's been an interesting debate around a very complex and very broad topic, really. I think one thing that's come out of this is that this is just the start of the process. There are going to be some really important changes happening over the next few years with regard to social housing, partly from a safety perspective, which is where things started, I guess, from with the response to the Grenfell Tower strategy, but also the fact that social housing is going to become increasingly important, I think. Looking at the statistics, the demand for social housing is immense, and the demand for people renting houses rather than being owner-occupiers is growing all the time. So I think looking at things, I hope that in the future Scrutiny is able to return to look at what happens through the work of the working group and the other developments that are taking place. It would be really interesting, for example, to look at how successful we can be in terms of getting residents much more involved in the management and monitoring of what's happening within our social housing stock. I think the big issue of social housing, our ability to provide more social housing and manage that more effectively, I think that's another key topic. And a further topic, I think, is the neighbourhood side of things. I think one thing we've alluded to, I thought your question, Councillor Stewart-Turner, was a very good one, that It is what happens within neighbourhoods and the degree to which we can manage and improve neighbourhoods, work with residents to tackle people's concerns is very critical, and I think that is something that needs a lot more time to unpick, to explore and to look at what we can do. Okay, so so just thanks again for everybody for taking part. And I do apologise that the panel has been a little bit smaller than usual, but I hope you understand given the context in which we held the meeting. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Right, so in terms of the broader agenda, there's just one further thing, which is just to confirm the fact that the next meeting is actually next week on the 7th of November. So thanks very much, everybody.